Thank you so much, and welcome to Next Up, our second half. Ray, one of the founders of the program, and I will be talking to another community leader. This time he's St. Louis attorney Jerry Schlichter, who has so many different interests and passions. I don't know if we're going to fit all of them into this half hour. You are going to be amazed when you hear what he's up to. He's been profiled in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, but most recently, he has decided to assemble an almost unprecedented package of benefits for the Afghan refugees who are coming to St. Louis, with the intention of making this kind of the nexus of Afghan refugees in the United States, if not North America. Jerry Schlichter, thank you so much for joining us on 9 PBS.
Thank you for having me, Charlie and Ray.
Well, you know, Afghan refugees come here with really just, the shirt on their back, really,
right.
not much more. Very few possessions, maybe a toothbrush, literally. But you have decided to head up an effort, kind of an ad hoc effort, I guess. You're not part of an official organization. No. You are going to provide the Afghan refugees who come here indigent with some real nice benefits. Can you explain those to our viewers?
Sure, Charlie, and thanks for your interest in that. This is a one-time opportunity for St. Louis. As we saw with the Bosnian immigrants, the critical mass that is necessary to attract secondary migration is the key to where most of the people end up. I'd like to see that be here. So what I've organized is a four-pronged community-wide effort to show our support to attract and retain them. Philanthropy, the faith community, business, and those three prongs are particularly important, especially because there's so much opportunity there for volunteers and so much need for volunteers that in those three spaces it's particularly important. And then just having a program that is specific and concrete and up and running right now so we can separate ourselves from the rest of the country. That's the idea here. So there's a call to action that we've done to the whole community to volunteer, to help these refugees with needs from A to Z, from being picked up at the airport to housing, transportation, recommendations on schools, medical facilities, and so on. And the program, though, to really have a robust program, Charlie, I've developed a number of institutions that we'll have right now and paid for out of the box, like no city in the country. What are they? First of all, housing is of the utmost importance. The families are over 5 average, 5.5. They have big families. And finding a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment is not easy. So there's a major housing fund to help the International Institute, which is our resettlement agency, one of 9 in the country that are getting the Afghan refugees, to bridge the gap between the 2 or 3 months of rent that they can provide and the typical 1-year lease that a landlord prefers. So that housing fund will enable them to have many more housing options. A community center right out of the box so that people can have a place to congregate. An Afghan Chamber of Commerce with a leader to help small businesses get off their feet. Coding opportunity for immersive coding done. There's a great organization here, a great company called Claim Academy, which itself is founded by an immigrant, Arch Grants recipient, who's a Nigerian immigrant, came here from Chicago to get an Arch Grant, and he's doing immersive coding for underserved communities and has veterans from all over the country who come here for coding. A translator for that, for them. A liaison with the International Institute to help handle these services. Very importantly, a newspaper. In the Bosnian community, what happened was they established a newspaper very early on. This wouldn't be print like the Riverfront Times formerly, Ray, it would be digital. For local refugees to connect with each other, hear about job opportunities, hear what's happening in the old country, and for Afghan refugees across the country to hear what's going on in St. Louis. That was a key factor in establishing the secondary migration with the Bosnians. 200 iPads for 200 families, so they can be sure to be connected. And this is a sort of a pet thing of mine as a former soccer coach of my 3 kids, my 3 sons. indoor soccer fields for kids at Manchester and Kings Highway, for them to have the opportunity to congregate, be with their parents, meet other kids. So that's a comprehensive program. It's like nothing else in the United States, and it's paid for, and we're going to begin right now.
We have a policy here at Next Up of not allowing undue humility, and you did start Arch Grants, right, about a decade ago, is that right? And I want to ask you about that, but first, let's talk, while we're on the subject of the Afghan refugees. It seems like our experience with Bosnian Muslims who came here was successful, but they didn't end up where they started. In other words, they came and it may be fine. That I don't know the statistics. I don't think we in the media have covered it very well. But originally they were in the city and then they weren't. And is there a strategy in this case for more of a long-term community? And again, maybe it worked out just for the best the way it did. But you understand my question, I guess, is to what can make it work more long-term for the community wherever it is that they might settle here?
It's a great question, Ray, and it's a complex answer, in my opinion. It's the story not only of Bosnians, but of people in general who get to a certain economic level and want better schools and move out of the city to suburban areas. It's also a story of immigrants around the country. The difference here is that we haven't, if you look at the Lower East Side in New York, it's been a story of generation after generation of immigrants from new countries replacing the immigrants who go to Queens or go elsewhere. We haven't had that. And it's all part of the need for city revitalization that is so important to us as a community. You know, when somebody's living in Ladue or West County or St. Charles County or wherever, it's easy to think that the city is divorced from their interests. And we hear all the stories, the negative stories. But if we don't have a vibrant urban core, we don't have a thriving metropolitan area. It's that simple. And what does that mean? It means we lose opportunity. We lose our young people who have choices. We lose people to make it the kind of city and region we all want it to be. And that's part of the reason why this Afghan situation is an opportunity, because it's an infusion potentially of people to combat the population and stagnation loss that we've had relative to other cities. That's why it's so important. But the problem you mentioned, Ray, is a problem that's a bigger problem than just the refugees.
Well, of course, you mentioned this earlier, and the big problem for refugees, Jerry, housing. It's just unaffordable for people who've been here, who've been able to speak English, who have their high school and sometimes college degrees. Now, how is somebody coming to the United States, even after a year of some sort of subsidy, going to be able to afford a 3-bedroom apartment in the greater St. Louis area, which I know is cheaper than New York or Philly, Boston and Chicago, but nonetheless, it just seems out of reach.
Great question. Two things. First of all, because of that cost of housing, the original locations in California and Texas in particular that were scheduled to get the most Afghan refugees are now tapped out. They can't handle anymore. They can't get the housing at a reasonable cost. And the government resettlement agency in D.C. has said that the Midwest is now the preferred location. Wow. So it's an even greater opportunity for us. And insofar as, to answer your question, we do have one advantage right now that we did not have in much of the past with other refugees. Everybody says jobs are not going to be a problem. Everybody's looking for employees. Todd Schnook made a call to action for the business community to step forward, and he'll be asking Schnook's employees to volunteer, but they have a need. One of the casinos said they could take hundreds of people if the opportunity were there. So the International Institute is not concerned, frankly, about jobs. That's the key. If they get a job, then of course they can afford an apartment.
It's so logical that St. Louis would be a great, because our housing costs are way lower than most, pretty near the bottom of metropolitan areas around the country. It's one of the undersung, that's probably not the right word, under-promoted attributes St. Louis has. I do want to get back to arts grants. I mean, it really is something that's a wonderful initiative you brought about. Was it 2012? Is that right?
We got off the ground in 2011, and the first cohort of recipients, of winners of the Global Startup Competition was in 2012.
Tell our audience about it, because it really is. Tell us what you do at Arts Grants and how much you do.
Well, it arises, Ray, from the same motivation as the Afghan refugees and other things that I've been involved in, and that is a desire to make St. Louis more vibrant. We've lost these giant corporations to acquisition or moving or disruptive technology, and we've got to grow our own. And that's what I saw in deciding to try to do that with a global startup competition. In looking around the country, there are others, primarily university affiliated, but they all take equity in the company, 10% for so much investment or something like that. I didn't want to do that if there were a way to avoid that. Well, how would you raise money with somebody not getting a piece of the company? The only way would be a tax-deductible nonprofit donation, and at least then there's that tax-deductible incentive. So I made the case to IRS that we were going to do this, and I was told by a senior lawyer here, you can't. The idea is to give grants, $50,000 grants, plus free and discounted legal and marketing and accounting services to the winners of a global competition. But because they are for-profit companies, how do you have IRS approve an organization which is for nonprofit status, giving money to for-profit companies? The key in the code that I found was that if it's an organization aimed at community development in economically distressed areas, that would qualify for nonprofit status. So all the data, statistics we don't like, made the case to IRS that is what it would be, focused on the urban core here, very diverse applicants, and they approved that status. And that was the linchpin in 2012 to launch the competition. Lots of naysayers, you can't raise the money, you can't do it at scale, and I didn't want to do it with 1 or 2 grants because that would not accomplish, it wouldn't move the needle. And you also aren't going to get quality companies, startups, to come here. We formed a board. To their credit, others on the board, Joe Schlafly, Bob Guller, Zach Boyers, were very bought in on the mission. And we jumped off the cliff. And as with so many things, you don't know where you're going to land, but if you want to be sure, you don't jump. So the community, the St. Louis community, has been awesome in its support. We've had hundreds of applications, even in the first year. We've been giving for the last year 20 grants of $50,000 apiece, $1 million, raised from donations. And we have now funded 208 companies.
Wow.
With $50,000. 84% of them remain in business. And remember, these are startups, and the rate of failure for startups is very high. They have to have national or international sales potential, so it's not just moving dollars around with a local business that takes away from another local business. And 86% of the companies in business remain in St. Louis.
Wow.
We've attracted them from all over the country: New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, San Francisco, San Jose, and places like London and South Korea. And they're here, and they're mostly downtown.
Wow.
In the city. And they're very diverse.
I assume you have a list of them at your website? Or
yes.
And how many jobs are now associated with Arts Grants companies? Do you know?
Directly, without any multiplier or anything, over 2,300 jobs. They've had follow-on capital of over $350 million.
Yeah.
and sales of 340 million, I believe it is.
That's amazing.
And we just this year, because of the generosity of a lot of people, increased the number from 20 grants to 35, just a whole new level. And we also established a follow-on grant program of growth grants so that the best of the best can apply for a second round and get $100,000 if they can raise money from venture capital sources. So this is unheard of in the country.
Yes, it is. That's why I wanted you to talk, because I don't think it gets enough credit.
Yeah, you know, and on the first half of the show, we probably should bring this up too, because we were talking about demolishing homes after we had the tragic loss of a firefighter a week ago today. And, you know, so we had this debate in the first 30 minutes. Do you preserve the homes or do you tear them down for safety reasons? You are the gentleman who wrote the historic tax credit legislation for the state of Missouri, which gives developers a tax credit if they renovate old homes. So what's your opinion on this? If there's a dilapidated structure, what do you do?
Yes, and that tragedy was just unspeakable, unspeakably sad. I think the solution is to find a way to rehab those buildings, those houses. The state historic tax credit is a tool for that. There are immediate needs, and those immediately difficult buildings need to have something done. To send a firefighter into a building like that is just unheard of. But this is our heritage. The reason that I did the state historic tax credit is because we have this wonderful collection of historic neighborhoods and commercial buildings that other cities would die for. It's our best asset. And to demolish it with a vacant lot it's a real harm to the city, in my view. So I think we find a way to get enough protection in those buildings to get them protected, get a roof on them, close them off to the elements, and then put them out for a bid for developers to use the state historic tax credit, which will bring state money into needy neighborhoods and enable them to get revitalized.
Do you think the city historically has, and it's interesting, that historic tax credits proved to be somewhat controversial politically, didn't they? Seems like we had a governor ago that maybe not wasn't too happy about them. Let me shift gears. Were you surprised that they became such a political lightning rod? And then the second question, which is probably taking two questions at once, is do you think the city has historically done enough to kind of catalog and track and account for this large number of vacant properties it has, so that they're inspected and these kind of tragedies that we just saw don't happen?
Well, on the first point, Charlie, I grew up in a small town. I grew up in Mascoutah, Illinois, across the river, and I understand what a small town has. The beauty of the coalition that we put together to get the law passed was it was unlike almost anything in Missouri, small town and St. Louis and Kansas City joining hands. Because when you think about it, small towns have a main street with merchants. Walmart comes on the outskirts of town, builds a strip mall, and all the merchants go there, or the vitality is sucked out of the downtown. It's exactly the same problem that we have in St. Louis with sprawl development, as it pulls people out of the city and the urban core. So we got it through, and it's been a remarkable economic development engine for the state of Missouri and St. Louis. Statistics, $8.5 billion in direct economic development for the state, across the state, not just in urban areas. Small towns that I could name 50 of them have used it. And over $4 billion of that has been in the city of St. Louis. Why? Because of our wonderful buildings and neighborhoods. So it's an advantage. In terms of your second question, the failure to have more rehab, especially in North St. Louis, North City, it's a tough question, Ray. I think part of it is due to the fact that maybe some people haven't understood it's available. It's not controversial in St. Louis. not controversial in the small towns that use it. There are certain members outstate of the legislature who've fought it because of the cost to the state. But we have data that show the benefit to the state outweighs by far the cost. And we're the national model. Missouri is
that right?
one of the few things that we're a national model for something good. Yeah, I get calls to this day from people around the country who say, we'd like to have a state credit like yours.
Jerry, your day job, you're an attorney. And what we've described is your avocations, your hobbies. But you have been in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal because you have sued corporations which have operated their 401ks afoul of federal law. The federal law says that the 401k plans, their retirement plans, have to be run with the best interest of the employee in mind.
Right.
But a lot of corporations don't do that. And according to either the Journal or the New York Times, you have saved employees nationwide about $2 billion in fees. Is that about right? Is that accurate? Is that up to date?
Yes, Charlie, $2.2 billion annually in the 401k industry has been attributed to our work by numerous federal judges around the country.
In many ways, sometimes the employees in their retirement plans were charged fees that were too high, correct?
Yeah, the problem is my dad was an aircraft mechanic. He was a civil servant, worked at Scott Air Force Base, and then he worked downtown in the federal building. And when he died, my mom lived on his pension. And she could have no more figured out stocks and bonds than jumped 8 feet high. But she didn't have to because she had that steady check coming in, that pension. The days of the defined benefit traditional pension in private business are gone. Be replaced by the 401k model, where the employee now has the risk, shifted from the employer. Market goes up, great. Market goes down, that's on the employee. Fees are high, that costs the employee. The law requires that fees be reasonable, and it's the employer's obligation to make sure that's the case. They're like a trustee for their employees and retirees. And if they don't do their job, their employees pay too much. But the problem is, there's no financial incentive for the employer. So what we found after looking at this for a year and 9 months was that there were very pervasive practices that were costing folks a lot of money. And I decided we would jump in with both feet, jump off that cliff without knowing where we're going to land, and fight a nuclear war, which is what we have fought on behalf of employees.
Do I understand, if I did my research correctly, that you've got a calendar item to go visit the United States Supreme Court sometime coming up on Northwestern?
We're in the court right now.
Yes. In front of the SCOTUS, or are you?
SCOTUS, U.S. Supreme Court, yeah.
And your last time there was in 2015, and you won unanimously?
Yeah.
That doesn't happen every day, does it?
No. There had never been a case brought
Right.
until we filed these cases for this. And yes, the first time the Supreme Court ever considered a case was our case in the U.S. Supreme Court. And we did win 9-0.
So where's this, is it Northwestern University you're
Yes.
currently? And I saw one of their arguments I thought was an interesting interchange was they were arguing that, well, we provide a menu of choices for people with their retirement funds, and you made the point that, you know, that's great if you have Bernie Madoff as one of them. I think that was the quote. It's complicated. It's above our pay grade, at least speaking for myself. But this seems like, I mean, nobody wins unanimously at the Supreme Court. Not many people.
Not many cases.
And what is the status of this case? I mean, you say you perform now, when do you actually go up and argue, or where are you in the process this time?
The process now is that the case has been briefed and argued. I didn't argue it. I wanted to, but we brought in a D.C. lawyer who's appeared in front of the Supreme Court many times, because to argue a case in the U.S. Supreme Court really requires setting aside about 2 months of your life and to get ready, and I couldn't do that. It's been argued. We have the U.S. Solicitor General who's weighed in with a supporting brief in support of our position, as well as AARP. The other side, Northwestern University, has the mutual fund industry and various trade organizations. But everybody agrees on one thing, Ray. This case will affect every 401k plan in America, and there are 600,000 of them.
Jerry, without getting too personal, is it fair to say that the money that you've earned through this work is funding a lot of your work with the Afghan refugees here in St. Louis?
That's a full circle, accurate statement. Yes, Charlie.
How do people get involved and volunteer with the Afghan refugees, which you invited them to do at the beginning of the program?
Yeah. There's a big need for volunteers because the resettlement agencies, such as our International Institute, downsized in the last few years because there weren't many refugees admitted to the country. So they need supplementation of what they can do. They need volunteers. They can contact the International Institute and offer to volunteer. What's needed is people who will commit to 90 days to 180 days. Whatever needs there are for a family, the International Institute needs some money to help offset the expense of relocating a family, but it's a discretionary amount. So what Archbishop Rosansky made a call to action as part of our press conference last week, asking on behalf of not just Catholics, but all religions, to ask their congregants to volunteer, and they are doing that. And Todd Schnook, on behalf of the business community, did the same thing.
So we can contact the International Institute,
yes,
to volunteer with the Afghan refugees who are coming to St. Louis.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but we're out of time for this segment.
Okay.
With this goodbye, maybe we can get you back sometime because there's many topics we didn't broach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jerry Schlichter with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Jerry. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Ray. And we'll be back next week at this time. Stay warm.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.